The newest Dominions release means that a bunch of items have been added to the sandbox. I have to preface this video with two things. First off, that I have not used every single one of these items extensively. I've tested them all and I've used a good selection. However, I have also done this video with consultation of a couple of experienced players and their experiences using these items or the items themselves in a vacuum. The other prefacing point is that these items are kind of thin, and you'll see it when I go over them. The vast majority are part of the glamour path or related to tertiary mechanics that Ilwinter has added. So don't expect to see very many air or water items in the selection. Now the first item we're going to be going over is the Pixie Spear, a single target fatiguing weapon that is often used and should be used to target single targets. Think of it like using Axes of Hate. You're fatiguing out a single target using a cheap weapon, and that's all there is to say. The Twilight Glaive should be the poor man's repel tool. High stats, two-handed weapon, but it's so expensive. It costs 10. The weapon's just too much for Repel Thug. And in the other use case of an army thug using the AoE 1 fatigue, the same issues arise. And that's an issue you'll see throughout Dominions, especially in this release, where a lot of these items are just a little bit too expensive to be worth using. Will I make a Twilight Glaive thug at some point? Yes. Will I be using it regularly? No. The Unseed Sword is an assassin tool. You could hypothetically use it in army thugs with low attack skill of the effects of invisible attack, but Assassin Patient plus invisible attack make it really good for assassins. The Blade of Grass is very similar to the Dusk Dagger. In fact, the primary difference is it doesn't do armor negation. Like the Dusk Dagger, it's really good against single targets. That's the use case. You don't have to worry about it because the Dusk Dagger is already fantastic at it. You have these paths, you do this, the other paths, you do the Dusk Dagger. Now moving on to armor. There's 3 new pieces of armor, well 2 new and 1 completely reworked. Gossamer Gown, kind of useless. All 1 just isn't worth it. I'm sure there's a use case somewhere, I haven't found it. Meteoritic armor, or meteoritic iron armor, is an MR item at Construction 5, what was Construction 4. Because of that, it's got its use cases on mages. You want to just sit there with high prot and high MR. However, the lack of defense and low and high encumbrance means it's not really good for someone actively casting magic after their first spell, and it's really hard to use on a super competitive thug for effective use. But the MR is nice. The Brightmail Hallberg was reworked enough where I consider putting it on here. Its prot was increased from 13 to 17 and received reinvigoration, making it one of the more effective low-tier armors, except it's been struck by the 10-cost, 5-cost fallacy. Too expensive to use on a thug, not good enough to use on a super combatant. Moving on to boots, we got the Pixie Shoes. They grant luck, defense skill, map move. They're kind of all around. Honestly, I don't think I see myself using this much at all, and I don't know what use cases there will besides the luck. We have the only temp gem item I've decided to go over. That's because it gives you 2 warrior illusions. Just efficient. If you find a use for 1 gem, this is nice. Like, it's just nice. Now, moving on to the ranged weapons. I have some tests revealing them. Here is what I think is the better one, believe it or not. And so, this army does use 45 gems of gear. Don't get me wrong, it's too much, right? But the Sling of Crystal Shards, 90 gems of gear. Sling of Crystal Shards is really expensive. However, in specific use cases, it does get its value. Now, in this engagement, you will see, as they fire, because each of them fires 6 rounds, you create a lot of these phantasmals. Kind of similar to a poor man's Swarm. It's not as effective as Swarm ever was, of course, because you're getting these off-successful hits. However, for multiple fights, it's a good way to generate disposable chaff, or a way to toss them into an actual battle. Your enemy's using advance and cast mages, that's specifically where this is best, because they'll often spawn on the rear. I'm not going to call this efficient, and I'd kind of keep it to your Forge bonus nations. However, in those specific use cases where you've got Forge bonus, you're forging a bunch, you have precision items or precision bless, precision spells, and you're getting enemies walking around in blocks, you can get a lot of use cases from these phantasmals, because in practice, they're better swarm bugs. Ethereal, 9 defense skill, and 1 armor negating false damage. Moving on, we have the other ranged weapon, the Bolo False Feathers. The Bolo False Feathers suffers ultimately from its low range. Got high ammunition unlike the other weapon, but 9 range just leaves it in a position where you have to get really close to use it. So you see in this battle, you're spreading False Feathers to single targets, which does destroy their defense skill, but it's really hard to use effectively. It does only cost 5 gems, 3 with a hammer, but it will consistently suffer from that problem, and the fact that ultimately you can often spend those 5 gems in a better place. There is one more weapon I didn't go over, which I left till now. That's a sword. That is the Singing Sword. It's reduced in cost for Iryu, but it does entrancement. Entrancement is an AoE 5 stun that's MR negates. Entrancement is good. Like there's no other way to look at it. It is a good spell. It is great for thugs. It's great for super combats because the effect of stun is turn one, like a 1 turn long Vine Shield. Blasts around, the enemy will not be able to attack. Right? That is it. That is all you need for this, right? This is also a good point to segue the boosts of Grasping Earth, which do a very similar thing to Vine Shield. In fact, they are the same. Vine Shield's been nerfed. Boots of Grasping Earth have been added to do the same effect. So can you get the same effect by stacking all 3 of these items? Yes. But like a lot of the items, it's expensive. The other new item that I'm going to do in this little segment is the Cathartic Lion Pelt. It used to be one of the end-all be-all for efficient thugs, and I think it actually is stayed as such. Some people will complain because its prot has been reduced, but the invulnerability 18 actually serves in its use case of fighting chaff. That just means you have to be even more efficient than you had to before for the cheap item, because the enemy's magical attacks will easily cut through. But in those cases where they don't have magical attacks, this is a very efficient piece of armor if you're not stacking that prot. Moving on to more weapons. Or more items, sorry. We have the stealth items. I've sorted these together. Not all of them are fully stealth. This is Scales Walls. But these are for your assassins and your seduction, right? Stealth boost, spy and stealth, beauty +2, unseen stealth hit points, and scale walls, which also affects the mount, which is really interesting for assassins. This is combined with a host of items giving warning. I haven't listed all of them, but here's just one, the Clockwork Bird. It says clearly with the Unseen Sword, like Illwinter's efforts to make the assassin game more of a cat and mouse, patrolling out people putting in higher cost, more effective assassins to attempt to assassinate through. You're using birds, you're using warning items. It's a back and forth that I think is a positive step for the assassination game. However, there are issues, some people would say, with some of the way assassins work. I'm not going to get into that here, but I do think the fact that the items provide this kind of ability to give yourself a bunch of effects is really positive. Now we have the boosters I have listed here. They're minor. I'm not going to go over them in detail. The Amulet of Clarity. The Amulet of Clarity is a poor man's true sight. You can't find anything that gives true sight. This is what you have. This does have another use, though. If you're dealing with lots of illusions, Disbelieve is really good. Because on a Thug or Super Combatant, this is a specific tool to deal with phantasmals. Is it an often tool? Is it something you're going to be using a lot? No. But it is a tool. It is something you can use. Keep it in your mind, but you shouldn't be leaping to this item. It's just utility. Pendant of Courage is similar. That's a morale item. This is good with all the morale effects, wailing winds, anything you're dealing with morale problems, that's what it does. You don't have to worry about it besides that. Pure utility. In the bracket of utility, we have the Dragon Crown. Now, the Dragon Crown's good if you have Dragon Pads and if you're building Dragon Mastery items. And in fact, you don't even need those. It's a good item to have if you're doing Drakes. Drakes have even gotten better this game because you see resist less often, at least for now, because Scales troops are more common. Some Frost Drakes, some Fire Drakes, any form of Drake, you want to increase the quantity. Dragon Mastery is a great effect. This is the cheapest we've had it. The next item we're going to be looking at, the Mirror of Trapped Images. Mirror of Trapped Images is a very interesting item because its effect imitates the Animate Skeleton amulet that you may have seen before. For reference, this is the amulet. This amulet, I should say, does its spell for 100% casting time, 30 fatigue. When the Mirror of Trapped Images does its version for 15 fatigue at 75% casting time. This really makes it reveal its effectiveness as a tool for raiding or mixing in with your armies. As you can see here, a small raid, of course, 1 PD, but it scales up, as you'll see with the scale of the combat. And these are elite troops, you have to understand. Like, these aren't throwaway troops, but they can't kill them, right? Because of the lacking quantity of ethereal weapons in this, kind of similar to what we saw with the slings, this is physically just a better version of that tool. While sure, you won't be getting people in the rear of the enemy formations, you'll be getting an absolutely obscene amount of phantasmals running at your opponent. The next tool we're going to be going, or the next item we're going to be going over is construction. Trains of reconstruction are niche, of course, because of the limit that they must be on inanimates. Now, what is an inanimate? For reference, an Iron Angel is not an inanimate. On the other hand, An Iron Dragon, which is a bit of a meme pickup, is the most common chassis you'll see this item on is, of course, golems. In fact, on golems, it's quite effective for specific use cases, but even on something kind of abnormal, like a divine named Iron Dragon, allows the thing to go run havoc on whatever it's dealing with. Its best use is honestly in boosting. Putting it in boosting lets you give your commanders extra arms, which lets them equip extra gear, such as an artifact like the Trident from Beyond, which is a water booster that takes 2 hands, or an elemental staff. Other examples in practice is here where I'm using 2. Now ignore the 2, you'd really only need 1 because of the way it stacks. Do Shaman Staff and Tree Lord Staff, which isn't normally applicable. But because of this combination, we can buff our nature by 2 and cast it from an extra range. Here's a case using 1 with a copper arm, do Death Magic +2, and then an additional +2. This is a way to boost up in death if you don't have the paths for Arena of Sorcery. In combat, of course, we saw the Troll King from earlier, who also uses the silver arms to stack. These arms don't stack with each other, but they stack with other arm items. Beyond the more active combat items such as these 3, which we have just gone through, we have the research boosters. The Dreamstone may have, and I believe honestly has become the best research booster in the game. At +9 research for 5 gems, it's an extremely efficient option that could only be used by Glamour mages and nations to cost in its effect. This is just a really good research booster, let's be honest here. Next to it, we have the Homunculus, a much worse research booster. Nature Magic level 2 versus Glamour's level 1, and giving you 11 research versus Dreamstone's 9. Keep in mind, making all these items with hammers, right? This is 3 gems, this is 3 gems, this is 7. When you go from a 5-cost item to 3, it's a much bigger difference from a percentage-wise than 10 to 7. And the next 4 items we're going to be covering are the 3 crowns, and the shield. The shield is the mirror of long lost battles. Think of it as similar to this item, except it does it in combat when enemies hit you. These crowns, on the other hand, give you active defensive effects. Battle summoning scorpions, nightmare aura, sleep aura. And you see an example of these in the fights. Here's the scorpions. As you can see, it's kind of similar to the effect of the worm mage. Kind of feeding out these scorpions, kind of chaff up the enemy. Honestly, it's probably the worst of the crowns. It's expensive, reduced by cold, and it gives very little protection and defensive at all. However, at least it gives you something to kind of fill up your square if you're a smaller commander. But, like, realistically, it is not the best choice. In this battle, we'll also see the shield, where if we follow it, we'll regularly summon phantasmals in. Now, the problem with the shield, compared to the ranged options, is it's often incapable of getting enough chaff out to actually build up a wall of chaff. Really, it'll block a hit or 2, it's good if you're dealing with SCs, but because of the fact that it only activates when an enemy hits you, it's just not as consistent as any of these other options that we've talked about for defensive measures. It's not as good as lifelong protection, it's not as good as a Vine Shield, but it's still an interesting tool that I feel like has some use cases in army thugs, but that requires more testing, realistically. Here's another example of a thug using one of the items. These are, of course, all throwaway thugs to demonstrate mechanics, but here you can see using the Nightmare Ore. This is another good use case of these slings. This is specifically where they really shine when the enemy's in the middle of an army, right? When the enemy's at front, the amulets really work better. But when the opponent is stuck in, this is the perfect place for the slings to get at work. On the other hand, you can see how this aura works. Enemies around him are going to take false damage. You will see, scattered about, enemies taking false damage from the aura whenever it procs. This is really good on some form of combat that doesn't have a very good kill mechanism. Because of the range of it in the AoE, it is dealing massive damage to these guys around it. Though it's worth noting, none to the Phantasmals because of the fact that they are illusions. They don't take false life damage. The last of the battles we're going to demonstrate, this one. The last of these items is, of course, the Sleep Aura Crown, the Headband of Open Dreams. This is a decent thing to stick on army commands, and if you haven't seen Sleep Aura before, it's on Shoot and Doji. It's an effect that puts people to sleep. Get the sleep effect, go down to defense 0. Unsleeping, of course, makes it where you're less likely to be affected by it when dreaming, and the Sleep Aura is pretty decent, but it's not like a soul protective effect. You'll see in this case, this Black Lord, who's running a pretty funny, weird kit, but still is a decent kit, right? Still has its protection, has 21 defense skill, has a two-handed weapon, a one-handed, and a shield, still dies. And it's not enough for it to hold on, specifically to the Sling of Crystal Shards, yet again. As we mark this video out, we'll call it here, I just want to talk about how the items in this that have been added kind of reflect a lot of the problems but benefits of the iteration 6. A lot of the miscellaneous thugging items like the Twilight Glaive will see very little use, but a lot of the more niche and exotic items like crowns and the Mirror of Trapped Images, I think add a lot more dimension gameplay that I think Dominion 6 has actually made a very positive step towards. I do wish a lot of these items were more usable, right? Like the Twilight Glaive is so cool conceptually, but it's so bad. But I do really enjoy what a lot of these items do. Thank you for listening. I hope this was quick enough. Talk to you next time.